Hello, I'm David Tyler, editor of Document Manager magazine. Today I'm speaking with Tara Combs, who's information governance specialist at Alfresco, one of the world's leading content management software firms. Let's start today, Tara, by looking at some of the main challenges that are facing organizations in terms of information management, but particularly from a governance perspective. Has the recent growth in home working been seen as an opportunity for vendors like yourselves? Or does it actually add more layers of complexity, more additional issues as far as controlling access, managing retention, that kind of thing?
So it's definitely an opportunity. We just announced our PaaS offering, so platform as a service, and certainly because of this, we've seen an increased interest because they don't have to have people on site to manage the infrastructure. Mm-hmm. It's been a lot of opportunity there. It's also for governance, trying to centrally manage all that content that's being created, but that's also caused issues because people are saving things locally on their C drive or on their home PC, and now that's not being managed or available for other users in the organization to take advantage of that.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I think that's always been an issue, hasn't it? This tendency for people to rely on their local storage, to keep copies of a file on the C drive, to not manage versioning and things like that. So this is obviously going to put an increased workload on any business that's trying to keep information in sync across a corporation, for instance. So I know a lot of companies are saying they're relying on cloud-based systems, Google Drive and the like. Is it enough to just say, we're putting everything on the cloud, this isn't really an issue for us? And if not, what kind of tools or solutions can you guys offer that will address that?
So the file sync and share are great, but there's no governance really applied to those. Box does have some retention management and some hold capability, but not really true records management and e-discovery capabilities. So we really offer 4 different user interfaces for the end user to choose from. So we have our Alfresco digital workspace, which is a Google Material Design and Angular 2 based UI that can easily be customized and create tailored UIs for different roles in the organization. So a great example of that is the FAA when they are doing drone registration for people's personal drones. We are using our Alfresco development framework, which powers ADW, as part of that. So real life example where that's being used. We also have our desktop sync client, and so that can be installed on Windows and Mac. It works seamlessly with all the users' desktop applications. So if I'm in Word, I look like I'm saving to Alfresco, but that content is being synced up to the Alfresco server. And it's great because they can be disconnected from the network, still work on content. And when they're reconnected, it'll sync it back up, but it looks like to them they're working on their C drive. So it's kind of transparent. And if they use Alfresco governance services, the organization can decide either to make anything that's been declared a record read only, so the user can still see it and make a copy of it, or it can be removed from all users' desktop, and the single source of truth is now on the server. So really for governance, I think that's a key point. Our third application is our Outlook plugin, and this allows users to work in the Outlook interface. They can drag and drop emails and their attachments into Alfresco. They can add files, create folders, search for content, participate in workflows. So all without ever leaving the Outlook interface, which is great because people spend about 80-90% of their time in Outlook on a daily basis. And then last but not least, we have our share interface, which is web-based as well, like ADW, but it's our older, more administrative and governance interface. But the users have a choice. They can use 1, 2, 3, or all of those interfaces and work the way that they want to work.
Sure. So the focus very much is about letting the user find the right tool that works for them, given the issues that they're facing at the time. Good, good. It seems to me that in many ways that the issues that we're facing, although things are a bit strange at the moment, the issues are very similar to what they've always been in terms of problems of finding the right information in the first place, making sure that you've got the right version of that information. Plus, of course, these days, increased security concerns in terms of compliance as well. And obviously what we're seeing as one solution to that has been to just have more and more repositories, more silos, often several ECM or other complementary systems all working together within one organization. The idea of managing information across the enterprise then is actually getting harder and harder, it seems. So we're not just talking about shared drives, but cloud-based file shares as well as on-premise systems. We've got mobile access, which of course is driving accessibility. It's something that users are demanding. But at the same time, as you've already touched on, we've got governance, we've got GDPR compliance requirements, which are kind of pulling us in the opposite direction. So we're seeing contradictions, even with things like the retention requirements within policies, can be contradictory within two departments of the same organization. And all of this, it seems to me, adds cost to the way that the organization is working, especially if you're in a highly regulated industry, pharma or something like that. So what I'm driving towards is cost reduction one of the main primary benefits that you can put forward, or are they generally more focused from a customer point of view on the importance of governance itself for the per se for the right reasons as a business need, rather than a way of reducing spending for the organization?
Yeah, so it's actually a pretty complex situation, because while they have those multiple ECM systems, they typically have applications built on top of those. Mm-hmm. So, if you think of Documentum, they owned the pharma market for a long, long time, and they had, custom applications built on top of Documentum to meet pharma needs. So it's not just, taking content out of an ECM system. You also have to rebuild that business application. And so our approach to that is we've now released Alfresco Federated Services, or Federation Services, and that allows that content to still be in that Documentum system or any other legacy ECM system or file sync and share like Box or Dropbox. And we'll manage that content where it lives as records. So basically what happens is we ingest a link in Alfresco, as well as any metadata that they want to bring over into our system. If they're Alfresco users, they can view that content from the Alfresco UI, but we're able to declare and file those as records in our repository. And when it reaches the end of its life cycle, we'll go out and actually defensively destroy it in that legacy system, and still leaving, a disposition report showing, or a certificate of destruction showing that it was defensively disposed of. So, having to rebuild applications takes a long time, and it's very costly. And you really want to try and get as much data off those systems before you move those applications. And by managing in place and governing it in place, you're able to do that.
You mentioned the idea of manage in place a couple of times. Can you go into a bit more detail about explaining exactly what that is, and how it addresses issues like content sprawl across business networks, or indeed across desktops itself?
Sure. So Federation Services offers really multiple things. The first one is manage in place. So the content will live in that legacy system. There'll be a link to that piece of content in Alfresco, where we apply the retention and disposition rules to it. When it's met the end of its life cycle, we'll go destroy it in that system. You don't necessarily have to declare it a record, but that's really the benefit of manage in place, is you're applying governance across the board. The second option that you have is when you look at those business applications, as you've migrated them over to Alfresco, we can reach over, and when a user's accessing that piece of content in that system, actually migrate it into Alfresco at that point. So sort of a lazy or intelligent migration. The third option would be just a straight migration where, I've got a file share. While it's my user's UI, I really want that content to be in Alfresco, so I'll migrate it in and leave a stub on that file share, so that it's basically just kind of an empty pointer there pointing to Alfresco. And then, of course, the federated search, being able to search across multiple systems so that you can have that combined results list, so users not going to this system and searching this system and searching in this system. So it improves efficiency and time as well. So Federation Services also provides the ability to search across multiple systems and have a federated search results list. So while you're searching, file shares or Box or Alfresco or any combination, SharePoint Online, they're up, you'll have a combined results list come back in the search results. And you're able to filter that by, metadata or the repository that it came from. You can view that document within that. We also have the ability to do a EDRM XML export, so the electronic discovery reference model. And when it's in that format, it can actually be then taken into an eDiscovery or review tool automatically, and then, called from there, or do your calling within the results list before you do the export.
Excellent. Okay. I was going to move on to the federated search specifically. Can you give us some idea of what it might cost an organization to respond to search requests for things like freedom of information and compliance requests like that? And what are the issues that contribute to those costs? And therefore, how does something like Federation address that?
Sure. So again, most organizations have at least 2 to 3 ECM or file shares, any combination thereof, what they consider a content source. And so Gartner's done studies, several people have done studies showing that that's about 70 to 80% of companies. There are even a greater percentage of those that have 4 to 5 systems, depending on, again, the business applications that are using those systems. So if you can imagine users having to go to every single one of those to perform a search, it's going to, take time. So a typical FOIA request, the search will be any place from $8 to $45 per hour. So again, if you're searching multiple systems and you're having to call through those results, that can add up pretty quickly. If you're looking at an e-discovery request, that's anything from $125 to $6,700 per gigabyte being searched. So the ability to do that, initial search with Federation search, have that combined results list, call through it, and then, be able to take that into an e-discovery or review tool saves, could potentially save millions of dollars for an organization, depending on how large their data storage is across these systems.
Sure. That absolutely makes sense. Yeah. And how important is it then for that kind of automation to be happening in the background, if you like? What I'm getting at is the need to make systems like that as user transparent as possible if you want them to be effective, you want them to be taken on board by the users. We've seen attempts in the past by software companies to force compliance onto the user by adding steps into the workflows, the kinds of things you have to right-click every email attachment in order to route it to the right repository and so on. I think where you try and force it in that way, there's quite a strong chance that the users just aren't going to do it. So automation then becomes key, and making it user transparent also becomes important.
Yeah, so Gartner had done a study a few years back saying I think 40% of all governance applications or implementations actually failed due to lack of user adoption. So that's one of the reasons that Federation Services is so important, because I'm an end user. I live in Outlook. I live in SharePoint. I live on my file server. I may live in Alfresco. I don't ever have to leave those applications in order to have my content managed as records. And one of the things that we really talk about Alfresco with governance is we call it invisible information governance. So we actually make it transparent to the end user that they're doing records management. Things are just being declared and filed in the file plan automatically based on metadata values, or at the end of a business process, it gets filed automatically as well. So key is, let the user live where they're comfortable, because then you'll get the user adoption of those systems.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That makes a lot of sense. Absolutely. Yeah. So we've seen Alfresco talking about intelligent content migration, which seems to address the point we were talking about earlier with regards to avoiding a big bang of data migration. So can you explain how this works and whether there's a processing overhead associated with that? So again, from the user perspective, there might be a willingness to get the benefits of content being automatically migrated, but if it comes at a cost to the response time of the systems that they're using all day, every day for their general workload, that might feel like too high a price to pay. So again, it comes back to what we were just saying about making it as invisible to the user as you can.
And so the great thing about Federation Services is you can actually schedule these jobs to run, every place from 5 minutes, which I would not recommend for a production system, but, to once an hour to once a day. So you could actually batch all these things at night, and that would cut down a lot on your process overhead. So, as users are accessing those files through the application during the day, at night, the job could run and say, okay, this was touched today, so now we're going to migrate it into Alfresco. And so again, we call it, intelligent migration, because we're only accessing those pieces of content that are being actively used that day by the end user.
Okay, sure.
Obviously, a little longer period to migrate things, but less costly and probably more efficient in the long run.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That makes sense. We touched on briefly the idea that there is this massive growth in data being created, being copied. Does that again add to another step into the governance process? And therefore add to the storage load on an organization? Or are we talking about, I think you've already mentioned this idea that we're actually talking about additional tags, additional metadata, XML, rather than additional duplicates or replication, copies of data in different places? I suspect you may have already kind of answered this question with what you were saying earlier.
Well, when we're talking about, so two answers there. When we're talking about content that we're natively managing in Alfresco, we are actually creating a link where that document lived in what we call a collaboration site, and it now resides in the file plan. But basically, we've got just a view of that document where it lived. So you're kind of making it, again, still easy for users to access the content that they were working with, but they don't have to be in the governance part of the system. So there's a link left in its place, and basically there's just some additional metadata added around the records retention and the life cycle, how long you're going to keep it, what are you going to do with it when it's met the end of its life cycle. So very similar to manage in place, right? The content will live in that other repository. We'll just ingest a link with any metadata, add the records metadata on there, and manage that link through its life cycle and go back and destroy it out of that system when it's met the end of its life cycle. So it's really kind of the best of the both worlds, because it gives you the ability to apply governance across your enterprise without having to migrate that set of content. The other piece that Federation offers is data discovery. So we're able to actually point the Federation services at a system, tell you if there's duplicates there, how old that content is, the type of content that it is. And you can look at that report and say, okay, this hasn't been touched in 10 years. So according to our retention schedule, we can now defensively dispose of this. Or I've got duplicates. I don't need those. So I'm going to go out and delete the duplicates that exist on these different systems. And that's key as well, because I'll admit, when I store things locally, I may have 5 or 6 copies with just one little change in each of those copies.
Sure, yeah. We all do it.
But I will say I store all my important information on our Alfresco system.
You have to say that, of course. It sounds like some very powerful solutions that you described there. And presumably they're using significant automation to smooth that migration process, or to smooth the governance process, to smooth search. Presumably, we must be looking at the use of emerging technologies like AI, like machine learning, NLP, these kinds of things, are going to have to be quite central to how these systems are able to do what they do. Is that right?
Yes. So we operate in a couple different modes. One is, I talked about the invisible information governance. And so that's really a rules engine that's built into our system that allows you to set conditions. So if this document has a piece of metadata that says it's an invoice and it's for this particular vendor, I know to file it in the file plan in this location. And when somebody makes a check mark that, the PO is complete, then we'll automatically declare a record and file it based on that metadata. But we're also working with AWS's AI capabilities, so text track, recognition, and comprehend. Text track allows you to take like an invoice and actually, it's more for structured, extract that information, feed it into metadata fields. Comprehend lets you understand what's in that document. So if you've got an unstructured document, it'll go pick out key metadata elements and actually populate those. So we can use that metadata again to determine the type of record it is, where it belongs in the file plan. And then the last one is recognition. So it's more about the semantic again. So, reading that document and pulling out any relevant semantic, this word within so many words of this word, and pulling that in as metadata to classify the type of record as well.
Okay.
Gartner did a study, I think it was last year, that said by this year, 80% of content that should be classified as records will be done automatically without user intervention, which tells you that, AI and analytics and all that are getting more prevalent in systems to do that processing work.
Absolutely. I think we're all seeing that coming through now, aren't we? That's excellent. Okay, that's great stuff. Thank you ever so much, Tara. I think we're more or less out of time now. I think we've covered everything that we wanted to do. I just wanted to thank you ever so much for taking the time to speak to me today and for sharing what's going on at Alfresco with Document Manager and our readers. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.